Gentlemen, welcome back to the Front Row Dads podcast. I'm joined again by Ian Cron. He was on the Front Row Factor show, which some of you may or may not know this, but years ago, back in 2005-ish, I started a charity called Front Row Foundation, where we would help kids and adults who have a life-threatening illness to go see the event of their dreams from the front row. That organization, that foundation, is still running to this day. Although I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations, I've stepped away from the board of directors. It's run by a great man named Andrew Smallwood. And we had a podcast for a lot of years called the Front Row Factor, then transitioned to becoming Facing Life is what we called it. And we were interviewing people to find out how they live life in the front row, how they step up and make the most of all their days. And one of the ways to make the most of the time that you have on this earth was to know yourself and know how you interact with the rest of the world. And then I became fascinated with Ian's work, where many people pointed me to Ian about his book, The Road Back to You, and studying the Enneagram. This had a profound impact on my life and a profound impact on my friends and my community here in Austin, Texas. We talk about the Enneagram constantly. And so when I had the opportunity to chat with Ian about his new book, I jumped at the chance. Ian's here today. Ian, welcome back to the show. Great to be talking with you.
Thank you, John.
So I think a natural place to begin here, though, is that, and my guess is it's not the leading question for most of your podcast interviews, is tell me about your family, because you are a father, and I'm interested in the relationship between Enneagram and parenting and your family today. So let's start with a little context. Who's at home? No longer at home.
Yeah, you're right. No longer at home. I have 3 children. Kale is 30, Maddie is 27, and Aiden is 24.
Nice. Awesome. And did you always want to be a dad?
Oh, yeah, I think so. That's a really good question, actually. I'm not sure I really thought about it a lot. Yeah. I mean, when the time came in the context of my marriage that it was time to start thinking about children, I think I had grown into this desire in the years prior to it. But it's not like at 15, I was like, I can't wait to be a dad,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Did you fall into the role pretty quickly, or did it take you a little while to get acclimated to being a dad?
No, I think I fell into it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I had such a wonderful time parenting my children. Obviously, we had our challenges like every other parent does, but my kids are really fine human beings. And I consider them not only my children, but to be 3 of my closest friends.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how would they describe you as a dad? And maybe they have, what's your brand at home?
Oh my gosh. I think my kids would say that I'm very creative, imaginative, complicated, at times tightly wrapped and moody. I mean, if I were to give you my Enneagram type, you would figure this out in a heartbeat, that I'm an Enneagram 4.
Yeah.
But that I was fun, and that I'm someone who's deeply empathic and really, really good when a kid's in crisis.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And I know that a lot of our audience will already know what an Enneagram is. So we're going to talk about some more advanced stuff as it relates to that. But also for anybody who doesn't know or just getting started, before I dig into how Enneagram played into parenting and how your kids and you interact around the Enneagram, which I am fascinated about, what's your high-level explanation of the Enneagram for those listening?
The Enneagram is this ancient personality typing system. It teaches that there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to cope, to protect ourselves, to feel safe, and to navigate the new world of relationships in which we find ourselves. And each of those types has a powerful unconscious motivation that influences the way that type habitually and predictably acts, thinks, and feels from moment to moment.
Yeah. And does it change over time? Somebody be a 4 when they're a kid and a 7 when they're an adult?
Well, according to the traditional teaching of the Enneagram, and I subscribe to it, the answer is no. I mean, you can evolve and mature when inside of your type, but your type follows you throughout life.
Yeah. And again, I'm holding space for getting back to how you interact with your kids around this. But very quickly, I wanted to ask this when I was listening to chapter 1 of the new book. And I've, of course, read The Road Back to You, and so have many of my friends. And we talk about the Enneagram a lot. I still am a little curious about nature versus nurture, what you're born with. And then, of course, the story that you tell yourself about your life. how did those two interact? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it 50-50? Is it different for every person?
Nobody knows. I mean, sometimes people will speak with a little bit too much confidence about their opinion, but really it's speculative, right? Some schools of psychology would say that it's purely genetic temperament. Others would say it's purely environmental. Others would say that it's a combination of the two. If I were going to lean into one of those three, I'd say it's a combination of the two. One thing is for sure, though, from a therapeutic standpoint, is that regardless of whether this is, nature or nurture, one thing for sure is that all of us have a narrative or a story that we adopt in childhood that I correlate to these 9 types, right? That there are 9 basic stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and how the world works, that when they remain unchallenged in adulthood, really wreak havoc on our lives. Mm. And so that's where my energies and my attention has migrated toward in recent days.
Right.
As people want to get healthy and develop self-knowledge within their Enneagram type, my premise is that you have to identify and challenge the story your particular type tells itself about itself. And, that for me, like Dan McAdams, who's a great narrative therapist, has a super line. He says, all transformation is story transformation.
Yeah.
So if you want to change, you're going to have to change your story.
Yeah. And when you say that, what I hear is you're not actually changing the fact that you played baseball. Like, I'm changing it to I played football. You're just changing the meaning that you gave to the story of playing baseball, right? What that story meant to you.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Our stories are made up of things like, internalized messages we pick up from parents, siblings, coaches, culture. It's the story we concoct as little kids, unconsciously, of course, is meant to help us, right? It's like, if you don't have a story to explain your experiences and what's happening to you, I mean, you're kind of just swinging in the wind, if you will, right? Like we have to assign meaning to our experiences. And, so for example, my parents got divorced when I was 4. Now you could assign meaning to that, like, because I was too much of a pain.
Yeah.
Right. That's assigning meaning. And you'll notice, by the way, it's not true. Right. But we can carry that story into adulthood and it will mess you up.
Yeah.
And each Enneagram type, I think, has a particular story it tells itself. And until we can begin to work with that narrative, we are going to find ourselves stuck in stories that aren't true, what I would call broken stories.
What's your story?
Well, I'm an Enneagram 4, man. So I think, and I so identify with this story. The story is that I am a person who is missing something essential in my interior makeup that everybody else seems to have, but I don't. And so that has launched me on a quest to find the missing piece, right? 4s are very, they can be temperamental. They're highly creative. They're disproportionately represented in the arts. And I had to identify that story and begin to unwind it in adulthood. Before I did that, right, as an adult, that story screwed up my life. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I say all transformation is story transformation. And the beauty of the Enneagram is that it will tell you the broken story that you have been imprisoned in since childhood.
Also, more context here. If there's 9 billion people on the planet, I'm saying this for ease of math, is there 1 billion ones, 1 billion twos, and so on?
No, I think there probably, again, it's speculation. Like, for example, we think there are more 6s than any other type of the population. There are more, probably second is 9s. But, you're guessing at this stuff, right? Like, who knows? And by the way, people are being born all the time, throwing off the curve, So, I think it's fair to say that there's probably a reasonably even distribution of types in the general population.
Yeah.
And
I feel like our community attracts a lot of 7s, 8s, and 3s. So 7, and I guess it's different on each Enneagram chart, but I always heard the 7 is like the enthusiast, right? 8's like an achiever. And then, 3's an achiever. 3's an achiever.
Right.
What's the 8?
It's the challenge.
Challenger. Right. We tend to have a lot of those guys in the Front Row Dad community. And we have a variety of people for sure. I'm married to a 7. So I'm a 7, she's a 7. And one of the most interesting things I've ever learned about the Enneagram was that, and again, you're the expert, so tell me if my understanding of this is incorrect. When a 7 is healthy, they're outgoing, they're adventurous, and so on. When they're unhealthy, they go to a 1, and they go to an unhealthy 1. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we clean the house and we do it out of a state of stress, it is not you don't want to be around my wife or myself when we're trying to like organize the house, because we become this perfectionist. Very interesting.
Yeah, that's a red flag. And that usually, the beauty of the Enneagram is, of course, is that if you do your work with it, you'll be able to spot that you are migrating toward the low side of 1 and make different choices than
that's right.
you did before you knew the Enneagram, right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting with 2 7s. Obviously, you have a high energy house.
Yes.
There's a lot of future thinking, a ton of future thinking. Both of you have a very difficult time staying in the present moment, which, how many kids do you have?
2, 12 and 7. Oh, 13 and 7. Sorry, just had a birthday.
Yeah. So like I had a woman who was an unhealthy 7 in a workshop once. She said, it's funny. I don't really remember very much about, I can't remember if she said raising my children or her own childhood. And I just looked at her and I said, that's because you weren't there. She was in the future the whole time.
Yeah.
And so part of the journey for 7s is, and particularly for parents, is like, you got to stay in the present moment or you're going to miss their childhood.
Exactly. Yeah.
So again, these are sort of the wonderful things about the Enneagram, is like, it reveals what's best about you, what's worst about you, your characteristic, ways of acting, thinking, and feeling. And that means, as you parent, man, it's like you can tap into that wisdom so that you can enjoy your children, and also in that you can sort of be able to mitigate the problems of your type that could negatively affect your children.
Yeah. Do your kids talk to you about the Enneagram? Do they use the language? Do they say, Dad, that's so 4 of you?
Well, first of all, that's a no-no, right? So my kids would never do that. You never want to use the Enneagram as a weapon for dismissing someone or insulting somebody or stereotyping somebody, which is different than typing, And
how so? Real quick.
Well, I mean, stereotyping is sort of generalizing things and into a kind of cartoon of a particular type, right? It's like people are more complicated than that, right? And within your type, everybody is a unique expression of that type. So it's not like there's only one expression of it.
Exactly.
That's a stereotype, right? I mean, sometimes I do it just to be illustrative, but it's like, a 4 is, let's say, I oftentimes say this as a joke, like Johnny Depp's character, Edward Scissorhands, is the patron saint of 4s, right? And, people laugh, ha, 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 ha. But again, you're kind of taking a little bit of a risk there, because not every 4 looks like that. That's so ridiculous. But it kind of captures some things about the 4.
Sure.
So anyhow, there is a difference between a type and a stereotype. And just, it's important to remember that not every 4 looks like Edward Scissorhands. I sure don't. Right. Yeah. So we are unique expressions of our particular type.
So your kids would never say, Dad, that's so 4 of you. How would they interact with you around the Enneagram? How has it helped you with your children? Yeah.
Well, our kids didn't really know the Enneagram until, mid to late adolescence. Right. And, so I think for a while we probably spoke about it. I mean, people say to me all the time, like they ask me 2 questions. One is, do you talk about the Enneagram in your house all the time? And then the other one is, like, when you meet people, do you type them? Like, are you always looking at the world through the lens of the Enneagram? It's like, no, I don't like type people when I go does that make, you know what I mean? Like when I walk into a party, I'm not like, I'm going to type everybody in here, and even with my kids, we don't talk about the Enneagram all the time, and periodically it'll come up, but it's not like we're all frothing at the mouth about the Enneagram. I mean, I think when you're healthy with the Enneagram, it's always an available resource in the back of your mind, but it's not something you're like thinking about all the time.
Is that because it's an unconscious competence for you? Just like driving a stick shift. Like I'm not thinking about shifting the gears yet, I'm doing it. So you won't walk into a party and go, I'm going to type everybody here. But in the back of your mind, you might be using the puzzle pieces of the Enneagram to see or to even notice within yourself. Like I just went from a healthy 7 to an unhealthy 1. I can almost like be unconsciously competent with then noticing it, shifting it, and moving forward because you just have so many reps at it.
Yes, I would say that because I know the Enneagram very well, I can tell very quickly because I've developed some self-awareness with it as a tool. I'm able to pick up pretty quickly when I'm not in a great space or I'm moving toward a not great space or when I'm in a really good space, right?
Yeah.
And like even being able to self-observe in the moment and say, oh, look what's coming up, that's pretty reflexive for me. And that's a great gift, man. Like the less time you can spend on autopilot, the better. Sort of in that trance of your personality where you're just like bubbling along and sometimes banging guardrail to guardrail through people's lives. That's not a healthy place to be. There are times when I walk into business meetings with clients and things like that, and I'm watching the room and I can sort of pick up on what the type dynamics are. And again, that's super helpful, but you got to be around the Enneagram quite a while before you take that risk.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people will base their assumptions about type on traits, and can be really inaccurate.
What age should a kid, in your opinion, take the Enneagram to understand and identify maybe where they are?
Yeah, I tell parents all the time, at the very least, never type your kids before the age of 13. Never. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some kids at 13, 14, 15 who are unusually self-aware. And I think if they have an interest in it and they choose to check it out, no, what the heck, But even then, as a parent, I would hold whatever result they have very lightly because in adolescence, their personality isn't entirely fixed. And so you just want to be careful that you don't box a kid in to something they're not. Now, ideally, I'd say college age and above, certainly really helpful.
I've got some exciting things to be able to tell you. We just went live with our website for the Front Row Dad live event happening December 2nd through the 4th here in Austin, Texas, right in my backyard. I am thrilled to bring this event to life. We've been talking about it for years. We've had these retreats where there are usually 40 to 50 people and we sell out every time. We've been doing this since 2016. Every event has sold out. And we have so many people who want to attend a live event, but we've never been structured to support that until now. And our website just went live. We had 3 people immediately secure their tickets. And guys, it's December 2nd through the 4th in Austin, Texas. You can see all the details at frontrowdads.com/live, or you can just go to frontrowdads.com and you'll see the information right there on the homepage of the website. But at this event, we are taking a deep dive into the 6 pillars that we focus on here at Front Row Dads. So of course, intentional parenting, thriving marriage. And we're also covering subjects like business evolution. How do you scale your business so that you own your business, but your business doesn't own you? Wealth and legacy. How do you get your money working for you so you have more time for your families? And how do you handle wealth within your family? Talking about vibrant health and emotional intelligence and so much more. We've got speakers like Hal Elrod, who is the author of The Miracle Morning. We have Justin Donald, author of The Lifestyle Investor. We have Preston Smiles, and Preston here lives locally in Austin. He is an amazing human if you don't know who Preston is yet. But one of the most impressive things is he has 4 children under the age of 5 years old. You're going to hear how he's doing all this. He lives an incredible life. He's got a beautiful relationship with his wife. These kids are incredible, and he's got this thriving business. How does he do it all? We have so many other people that are going to be there. I want to save some of the surprises, but you can go check it all out now and reserve your seat while you can at frontrowdads.com/live. Now, this is 6 months out, but I'm telling you, within hours of going live with the site, we sold 3 tickets immediately and we only have 150 spots. So if you know you're going, go get your spot right now, frontrowdads.com/live. What impact have you seen on other fathers in your life, other dads that you've been able to witness? How have you seen the Enneagram make a positive impact in their marriage or within their families? How have they utilized it as a tool effectively?
Man, I can just tell you this. When I do public workshops, not corporate workshops, one of the things I hear all the freaking time, probably at every single workshop, is the Enneagram saved my marriage and the Enneagram revolutionized my parenting. And oftentimes I've had people tell me the Enneagram helped me heal a rift with an estranged child. And so it's a very powerful tool in both of those roles, right? As a father and as a parent. Even in my own marriage, I've shared this publicly that we were in a pretty rough patch when we both learned the Enneagram years ago. And I mean, it brought so much healing to our marriage because suddenly we began to understand each other's interior world. We began to realize, oh, that's why you act or think or feel that way. And I mean, my wife, when she first read the Enneagram, she was reading, I don't know, some book on her type, and she just burst into tears. I mean, she was like, oh my gosh, you have to read this to actually know what I'm like inside. And I mean, that is an incredible gift, right? Like if I wish I'd had the Enneagram when I was in premarital counseling. Holy smokes, it would have saved me a lot of heartache, right? A lot of heartache. Now with my kids, it has been tremendously helpful, right? And they would tell you it's been tremendously helpful for them as young adults, right? I mean, seriously helpful. And so, for example, I have a child who's an 8. And I've learned not to be intimidated by them because trust me, they can be intimidating. I just know that for me to be in relationship with that challenger, I have to power up and meet their energy all the time or they just don't respect me. They just won't respect me. Right. And with my 7
That's interesting.
child. Yeah. Well, with my 7 child, I know that if I'm going to have a hard conversation with them, I have to limit it to about 15 to 30 minutes because after that, this child basically has trouble staying in those painful feelings. And so I may have to say, okay, we're done now.
True.
We're going to pick up this conversation tomorrow and have act 2. And then I may have to go to act 3, if I have the luxury of that time. And then with my 9 child, I can have that difficult conversation all at once. You know what I mean? So it's like, I just have insights into things that have really put a lot, this is a weird word to use, but has put a lot of efficiencies into my parenting.
Yeah. Man, I'm seeing my world through the stories that you just shared, which is probably appropriate of why we're talking today because of the new book, The Story of You. But when I think about all this, I'm thinking about my wife and I, that we can't have these long conversations that I sometimes get jealous of. I hear other couples are like, we sat down and talked for hours about that. And I think we're lucky if we get past 15 minutes. But it's also why my wife and I have some of our best conversations when we're walking. So as 2 sevens, if we're sitting at the table trying to have a deep dialogue, doesn't work. But if we're out walking around the lake, we can literally talk for an hour, it seems, because we're stimulated by the other people and the water and the breeze and the walking. And because we've utilized the 7 energy to have the conversation.
Sure. We find our own strategy to maximize our opportunities for interaction with each other. So I guess every type has to develop enough self-awareness, right? That they can be the highest expression of themselves in a relationship.
Yeah. Where do people get tripped up on this? Where do they get the Enneagram? They start in on it, they learn about it, and then they're like, I just can't get past this one piece. And then they miss the benefit of the tool. Well,
I mean, some people will say, I don't like the idea of being labeled or put in a box, and I have to tell them that the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It tells you about the box you're already in and how to get out of it, right? So I mean, that's one thing. Sometimes people will object saying, well, this seems so reductive because there are 7 billion people in the world. How can there only be 9 personality types? And I'll have to tell them, well, think about the color red, right? And we know from studying the color continuum that there are an infinite variety, right, of reds.
Reds, yeah.
Right. Like, in fact,
great analogy, yeah.
There are reds that don't look anything like each other. Like you wouldn't even know one of them was red, but they're all red, right? So when you think about a type like 7s, I just say, look, there's an infinite variety of 7s. They may not even look like each other sometimes, but they're still 7s, right?
So well said, yeah.
And then the last thing I'd say is that some people are like, well, I think I'm all 9 types. You know what I mean? Because I hear in each of those types a part of who I am. Like, oh, I sound like that. I sound like that sometimes, that like sometimes. And I always have to tell people, look, you're all 9 types. There's just one that you camp out in more than any other. It sounds more like you than the other 8. So I often tell people that all of us are like a house with 9 rooms, right? And we all, though, like there's the room I'm in right now. This is the first room I go to every single day. Like I walk in here, I read here, I write in here. It's the room I feel most comfortable in. We all have a room in the house like that, right? And there are rooms in this house. I rarely, unless there's someone in the guest rooms upstairs, I never walk in those rooms. And so, I mean, periodically. So if you think of each of those 9 rooms as a type, right? Well, this room is 4. Right. Yeah. This is the room I spend the most time in. But it doesn't mean sometimes I don't go down the hallway and walk into the 2 room or walk upstairs into the 1 room, or you know what I'm saying? Like, and borrow its resources and kind of do things in a way that is similar to that type. But I live in the 4 room most of the time.
It's interesting. I've been exposed to the Enneagram for so many years, and I've never had it explained that way. That's extremely helpful. Even for me at this point where I'm totally bought in, those are some nuanced and very illustrative, ways of describing the Enneagram. I really appreciate that, Ian. Thank you. Tell me, I know I want to be conscious of the clock here and I want to get to the book because I'm excited about this. The Road Back to You is a very powerful book for me. I don't know if I shared this with you, but it was the book that helped me understand my relationship to alcohol. And I think it was a particular part of that book where it helped me understand why I might have gravitated towards alcohol and how I was trying to numb feelings and avoid and also why some people had a problem with my positivity over the years. Like, I don't trust him. He's positive. Everything's a silver lining to everything. There were so many elements of myself that were revealed in that book. It was so powerful. I want to thank you for writing that. I've recommended it to people. Of course, we shared it on the podcast previously if somebody wanted to go back and listen to that episode. And for the record, congrats on the success of that book. I know enough about publishing books, having one of my own out there, to know that you have 10,153 reviews on this book on Amazon. That is absolutely remarkable. That puts it as one of the best selling books of all time. You cannot get there by doing enough podcast interviews. That's because it's an amazing book and people will give it to a friend and say, you've got to read this. That's the only way you get to that point. So in my opinion, so thank you for writing it and congrats. How is the story of you different than The Road Back to You? How are they distinct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, The Road Back to You was just a primer, an introduction to the Enneagram that I hoped would be entertaining and would contain enough important information that it wasn't just flimsy and too simplistic, but at the same time wasn't 500 pages like a lot of other Enneagram books are. And it wasn't dry and very clinical. I love those books, but they are what they are, right? So it was sort of a gateway drug that, if you stopped at reading with The Road Back to You, you would know enough to change a needle in your life. Or you could say, oh, wow, now I really want to go down the rabbit hole and learn a ton more. And there is a ton more to learn. The story of you was sort of the next step on the journey. And that is, well, what do I do with this information? Right. And so I framed it out as saying, okay, this isn't just a personality style. This is a story that you adopted as a little kid and then unconsciously brought into adulthood where unless you challenge it, it's going to make a mess of your life. So you're an Enneagram 7. You're an enthusiast. The broken story that you told yourself or adopted in childhood was something along the lines of, I'm on my own. The only person who's going to take care of me is me. And I am in a world where bad feelings, thoughts, or circumstances are kind of unbearable. And I'm really afraid that if I go there, I'm going to get stuck and no one's going to be there to help me. And so what do you learn to do? You learn to go, and by the way, one of the feelings that you're so freaked out by, but it's always present, is anxiety. Like, I've never met a 7 who's not underneath the surface, right? They look fun, they look happy, they look adventurous, they look carefree. But I've never met a 7 that, if you scratch the paint on the surface of their lives, you didn't find a lot of anxiety underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of fear. And so what do? You say, okay, well, I have to live in a future. I have to always be thinking about the next great adventure. I always have to be sampling all that life has to offer, and be distracted and from difficult feelings and pain, because I'll never get out of it. Do you see how that's a really broken story? Now, that served you in some way as a little kid to make sense of the world and your experience. But if you carry that into adulthood, there's so many dangers. You just described them. You could become toxically positive. You could become someone who's constantly avoiding commitments to people or activities, or jobs. You may become someone who has so much trouble finishing things because, there's always something new coming along that's going to be far more interesting, I do know a lot of 7s with addiction problems, tons of them. I know a lot of 4s and 2s and 9s as well, but 7s are kind of in that group of people that, I go to a 12-step recovery program for recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. I can tell you, I meet a lot of 7s. There's plenty of them in there, because what quicker way is there to escape negative feelings, right? It's a highly efficient way to get out of it, right? And not only that, but 7s love to they love a great party, man. So it's sort of a natural thing. I'm not saying you're an alcoholic, but I'm just saying that I meet a lot of 7s that were really attracted to chemicals as a way to deal with difficult feelings. So if that's the story you're trapped in, you can say to yourself, this story kind of sucks. And I need to rewrite this story as an adult that makes more sense, that aligns with my values, and work on my character in such a way that I become the person that makes sense in this new story.
Yeah. I know I read that there's a framework that you present. So if you've identified your story, you can say consciously, okay, that's a broken story that I don't want to take into adulthood. You've built a framework to help somebody to rewrite the story, tell a new story, sure, create an empowering story. We got 5 minutes. Can you unpack that in the time we have left?
Well, let's use you as an example.
Great.
Okay, let's go there.
Free coaching, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. So when you were a kid, do you identify with the story I just described?
Absolutely.
Okay. So can you just tell me about what happened in your childhood that you think probably led you to adopting that story in your life?
Well, one is that the story is that I was really, really short. And I was not even 5 feet tall when I entered my sophomore year of high school. I wasn't developing. I had the bone age of a 9-year-old. I was seeing an endocrinologist. The story was that I was insignificant, that my life didn't matter. I think that what I did is I got so committed to being adventurous so that I would feel alive. Other people would notice me. And then I found my way into activities, found my way into alcohol and other, substances that would take me out of the moment. I found my way into a job where if it was going to be, it was up to me, right? I was a sales rep for Cutco knives. I was selling these high-end kitchen cutlery knives, and that company was adventurous, and we were taking trips and prizes and significance and all of that. But deep down inside, I definitely was angry. And if I got triggered enough, that anger would come out because there was an anxiety there that was almost driving that. And so my addictions were not only with alcohol and other things, but I got addicted to the charity work. I got addicted to running ultra marathons. I got addicted to things that would take me out of my moment and create something meaningful.
Yeah. How'd that story work for you?
In some ways, it served me. You could say I did good work through the charity as a result of it. I would also tell you that for the first 6 years of my son's life, I was so busy trying to make a difference and be a moment maker. I mean, that's what the book was about. That's what the charity is about. That's what my brand was about. My speaking was about. That I was more of a moment maker for the world than I was for my family. I wasn't a great dad for the first 6 years, I believe.
Okay. So what we want people to do is see the story that they've been, and we haven't had a chance to talk about your childhood origin story. That would be the thing I'd be even more interested than starting in sophomore year. We have to see the story. We have to be able to articulate the story. Like, how did I get here? Like, how did I get to be a 7? Like, what was happening as a kid?
Sure.
Then the second step is O. So this is in the acronym SOAR, SOAR. So we want to see the story, then we want to own the story. Like, and you just did, right? Like, what does it cost me to live in this story? Like, it cost me missed years with my children. It cost me drug and alcohol issues. It cost me this. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to own it. You also have to do what you also did, which is to own the best side of that story, right? I mean, the story did have some benefits, right?
Yep.
But then you have to go to A, which is awaken, which is like, well, how do I know when I'm in the trance of this old story, right? And then the last one would be to rewrite, which is how do I craft a new story that aligns with my values, that no longer has me trapped with these old beliefs and assumptions and these old messages that I picked up. You know, I've got to let that stuff go and find something new. Right? That's true. That's not based or predicated on lies, right? So like, I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. I described you what a 4 is like. Dude, eventually I became an alcoholic and a drug addict to deal with that feeling that there's something fundamentally missing in me that everybody else seems to have that I don't. And I had to, as an adult, so when I rewrote that story, for example, one of the things I do in the book is I tell people, name the old story, rename the new story. And so one of the ones I would say that my old story, I would have titled The Lost Boy. And then the story I subscribe to now about myself is called The Redeemed Man. Mm. And so just even that exercise of saying that old story of the 4 that I adopted as a kid, that sucked. That was a bad story. That story was toxic. Now, the new story I have is life-giving. It's generative. It's made me a better father. It's made me a better husband. It's made me a better human in the world. And I am not nearly as plagued by those old messages that I picked up as a kid. Those are old story messages. And they don't tyrannize my life like they did before I knew the Enneagram and about this whole idea of changing narratives.
Ian, I promised a stop here. I'm tempted to push beyond, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go. I'm going to say, look, in the future, when your next book comes out, we'll pick up the conversation where it is. But I do want to say this: the book is called "The Story of You." It's out now. Everybody should go get it. We will have the first chapter available, the audio of that available at Front Row Dads under the show notes with this episode, available to everybody. I also recommend The Road Back to You as an excellent book. I want to thank you, Ian, for the work you've done on yourself, the work that you're doing to serve the world. I so admire that you have a great relationship with your children. That inspires me to do the same in my life. I hope to be saying the similar things about my children when they're grown, as you do about your own. So I really appreciate you. And I just want to thank everybody for listening today. And I want to thank everybody for doing the work on yourself and within your family, because one of the reasons I'm so passionate about dad work is that when I look at the world, I see lots of brokenness. I see lots of problems. See lots of things I'd like to get involved in and fix, the environment or politics or all these things that are huge things that you're like, oh, can I make a difference there? But when I drill it down to what I can actually do, it's work on myself and then serve my family. Those are the two places that I land consistently. And so to everybody out there who's working on themselves as men, or if you're listening to this and you're a mom, or whoever you are, I want to thank you for the work you're doing on yourself, and thank you for the work you're doing for those that are around you. That's it. Ian, thank you so much for being here, man. Is there anything you want to say to close things out?
Yeah, I mean, people can go to my website, which is, maybe you'll have it in the show notes, but ianmorgancron.com. Ian Morgan Cron is my handle across all my channels. And if you go there, there's an Enneagram assessment called the IQ9. There's a beautiful new couples assessment. So couples can actually figure out what the dynamics are between them and how they can improve.
Nice.
There are courses obviously available, and I will trust that all that will be in the show notes.
Yeah, everything's going to be there. Guys, Ian Morgan Cron, bestselling author, psychotherapist, Enneagram teacher, host of the very popular Typology podcast that has over 20 million downloads, and on and on and on. If you want to read more about Ian, again, we'll put everything in the show notes. Ian, thanks for being here today.
Okay, cheers.
Gentlemen, thanks for listening to the show today. 2 actions to take from here. First, implement one thing that you learned from the interview. And number 2, share this episode with somebody who values being a family man with a business. If you're enjoying the Front Row Dad podcast, the biggest thanks we ever get are honest reviews. So thank you for your feedback in advance. We read all of them. And if you want to learn more about the Brotherhood, which is our private community of 200 men from 6 different countries, visit frontrowdads.com for more info. If you're wondering what the hell the Brotherhood is all about, I'll leave you with some real feedback from guys who are active members and why they are part of our crew. Thanks again for listening to the show, and I'll catch you on the next episode.
You had this passion for wanting to find a way to make you a better parent and a better husband, just better in general. And so you developed this community of like-minded men that aspire to be better and aspire to put family first and business second. And so to me, there's no greater place I'd rather be. You know, people ask me all the time, like, if I could only pick one group, mastermind, organization, whatever to be part of besides my own, it's always yours. And that's it. And by the way, part of that has to do with you and the leader you are and the way that you treat people and how you show up, and the level of preparation that you have and the quality and amount of value that you offer. And then part of it's in the community that's been assembled and these unbelievable like-minded men that show up willing and ready to serve and to give and to share. And so to me, there's no better place that I can be spending my time. I look at 2 different things that we can be doing with our time. One of them is growing relationships and starting first with the most important relationships. And the other one is growing our financial acumen and our wealth to be able to do the things that we want to do and have impact and be able to spend time with the people that we value most by buying that time back. So to me, what you do and what I do is a great marriage of what I think is most important. And I would also throw in there that health is, the other component of that. And I feel like the community that you've built, that each of us have built, is also centered around that, because you talk about being a great husband, parent, that's going to come from taking care of yourself and making sure that you have the energy to be able to serve. And I do the same thing on a wealth standpoint, because wealth to me is not just about money. It's actually about having the time and the space to have your personal health. I would take having great health over no money any day of the week, rather than the inverse of that, having a lot of money but no health. So to me, those are like the 3 most important components. And to me, we're always merging those 3 in the things that we each do. And so I think that's why there's a lot of crossover of, members. That's why what you do resonates so much with me. What I do resonates so much with you. I joined as a lifetime member for that small little window where you offered it. I'm like, I'm in, because I know if I'm going to commit my time anywhere, this is it, because it makes me a better man. Makes me a better husband, makes me a better father. It encourages me to really step up my peer group with other like-minded men so that I can be on mission, on point with other people that will hold me accountable at the highest level.
John and I met a year and a half ago with the launch of my first book. And as we were going through the interview, I began to ask him questions about the Brotherhood, and it resonated within me that a community a community of like-minded, like-hearted men that wanted to win, as he was just saying, at business and in life. And I'd reverse that. I wanted to win as a dad, and then I'd also love to be successful in business, because I feel like if I don't get the dad right, who cares what I did in business? That's my legacy. That's what lives beyond me. So to tribe up with a bunch of dudes going in the same direction with the pillars that are in place and the way that not only are you encouraged, compelled, you're chided, you're laughed with, but you get to pace yourself, but you can get around a band of dudes that you can trust, you can share with, you can grow with. And just recently completed a time with these guys. We did this fast at the start of the new year. Every day I would tune in to the little app where we were sharing comments. And I was so impressed how you could see guys that were further down the road and things like this, guys that were just starting, and the camaraderie, the encouragement. So for myself, this was a total fit. And I would encourage any dude that's looking for a place where you can feel connected with a band of guys wanting to go in the same direction. Front Row Dads is for you.